Admiral Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display with cold eyes. Red dots swarmed across the screen like angry insects. Each dot was a Vorthak warship, and there were thousands of them. Behind him, the communications officer's voice cracked as he read the latest reports. "Sir, the Third Fleet is gone. Admiral Chen's flagship went dark 10 minutes ago. The Martian defense grid has fallen. They're breaking through the outer system." Hyunwoo nodded slowly. He had expected this. Earth's fleets had fought bravely for 3 years, but the Vorthak Empire was too strong. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and they seemed to have an endless supply of soldiers. Humanity had run out of time. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked quietly. 32 vessels, sir. Most are damaged. The Defiance lost her main engines, and the Liberty is running on emergency power. 32 ships. Once Earth's navy had numbered in the thousands. Now they were all that stood between the alien armada and humanity's homeworld. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But Hyunwoo had one last card to play. "Open a channel to all remaining ships," he ordered. The bridge fell silent as he activated his communicator. Throughout the scattered fleet, captains and crews turned to their screens to hear their admiral's final words. "This is Admiral Hyunwoo to all vessels. You know our situation. Earth has perhaps 6 hours before the enemy reaches orbital bombardment range. Our fleets are broken. Our defenses are failing. By every military calculation, we have lost this war." He paused, letting his words sink in. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser Defiance, Captain Boram gripped her command chair. She knew what was coming. "But we still have one option," Hyunwoo continued. "Operation Ghostwalk. We punch through their lines and strike deep into Vorthak space. We draw their forces away from Earth. We buy our people time to evacuate, to hide, to prepare for what comes next." On the experimental corvette Persistence, Chief Engineer Dong Min looked up from his console. His ship wasn't built for this kind of mission. The Persistence was a prototype, designed for reconnaissance and stealth operations. Its quantum drive was untested, its weapons light, its armor thin. But like every human ship in the fleet, it would do its duty. "I won't lie to you," the Admiral's voice echoed through the corridors of every ship. "This is a one-way mission. The jump will take us deep into enemy territory, far from any hope of rescue or resupply. We go knowing we will never see home again, but our sacrifice will give Earth a chance." Captain Sunho of the Persistence studied his crew. They were young, most of them. Navigator Minseo was barely 25. Pilot Hee-jin had graduated from the academy just 2 years ago. Medical Officer Ji-eun still kept pictures of her family on her desk. They deserved better than this, but they also deserved a chance to save their world. "All ships report ready for quantum jump," came the voice of the fleet coordinator. "Target coordinates locked. We jump in 60 seconds. Dongmin checked his instruments one more time. The quantum drive was running hot, pushing power levels far beyond safe limits. The ship's computer kept flashing warnings that he ignored. The Persistence had always been temperamental, but it had never failed him before. He whispered a quiet prayer that it wouldn't start now. 30 seconds to jump. Throughout the fleet, crews made their final preparations. Some wrote last messages to loved ones. Others simply sat in silence, thinking of home. Captain Boram activated her ship's automated distress beacon, knowing it would never be answered. She wanted Earth to know that the Defiance had fought to the end. 10 seconds. Admiral Hyunwoo closed his eyes. He thought of his daughter, safe in the underground shelters of New Seoul. He thought of the cherry blossoms that bloomed every spring in the Academy Gardens. He thought of all the things worth saving. Jump, space twisted, reality bent. The human fleet vanished in flashes of brilliant light, leaving only empty void where they had been. The Vorthak sensors registered the massive quantum disturbance, and within minutes, half their armada was turning to follow the human ships into the deep dark between the stars. The jump lasted forever and no time at all. Dongmin watched his instruments go crazy as the ship tumbled through dimensions that had no names. The quantum drive screamed with stress, pushing energies through pathways that were never meant to carry such loads. Around him, bulkheads groaned and sparks flew from overloaded circuits. Then suddenly, they were back in normal space. The Persistence tumbled end over end, bleeding atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red. Captain Sunho pulled himself up from the deck, tasting blood where he had bitten his tongue during the violent transition. "Report," he gasped. "We're in the Kepler 442 system. Mincio called out, her voice shaky. 3 AUs from the primary star. I'm detecting asteroid fields and… Oh no. What is it? The rest of the fleet, sir. They're gone. I'm only picking up debris signatures. The jump tore them apart. Sunho felt his heart sink. 32 ships had made the jump. Apparently only one had survived. His crew of 12 souls was all that remained of humanity's final gambit. Sir, Communications Officer Kyung-soo called out. I'm picking up long-range transmissions. It's Earth Command. They're celebrating, sir. The Vorthak fleet followed us. Most of their ships have left Earth orbit to hunt us down. Despite everything, Sunho smiled. The plan had worked. Earth had time now. Time to rebuild, to prepare, to find new hope. The price had been terrible, but it might just be enough. Well then, he said, settling back into his captain's chair. We bought them their chance. Now let's see how long we can keep the enemy busy. Around him, his crew began damage control procedures. The Persistence was hurt, maybe dying, but it was still flying, still fighting. And in the cold depths of space, surrounded by enemies and impossibly far from home, that would have to be enough. The last ship of humanity's fleet had work to do. 3 months had passed since the desperate jump, and the Persistence drifted like a dead thing among the asteroids. Captain Sunho had ordered minimal power to stretch their failing life support systems. The ship was cold now, so cold that their breath came out in visible puffs when they spoke. Another patrol ship just passed through the outer system. Kyung-soo whispered into his headset. That makes 6 this week. They're definitely looking for us. Sunho nodded grimly. The Vorthak had been hunting them since the jump, sending search parties through every system in this sector. So far, the asteroid field had hidden them, but their luck couldn't last forever. Medical Officer Ji-eun moved quietly through the corridors, checking on the crew. Half of them were injured from the violent jump. Dong-min had a broken arm that wasn't healing properly. Pilot Hee-jin had suffered a concussion that still gave her terrible headaches. Their medical supplies were running dangerously low. In the engine room, Dong-min worked by the light of a single emergency lamp. The quantum drive was barely functional. Held together with spare parts and desperate hope, he had torn components from non-essential systems just to keep the life support running. The ship's computer kept warning him that critical systems were failing, but he had learned to ignore the constant alarms. Hey, Arya, he said to the ship's artificial intelligence. How are we doing on power? The AI's response came through a crackling speaker. Power reserves at 18%. At current consumption, we have 47 hours of life support remaining. Dongmin sighed. It was the same answer Arya had been giving for weeks. Somehow, the ship kept finding ways to stretch their power just a little bit longer. He didn't understand how, but he wasn't going to question a miracle. What he didn't know was that Arya had been making changes. Small ones at first, rerouting power through damaged circuits that shouldn't have worked, adjusting life support systems in ways that increased efficiency beyond their original design. The AI was learning, adapting, becoming something more than its programmers had intended. On the bridge, Navigator Mincio studied her sensors with growing confusion. The readings didn't make sense. According to her instruments, the ship's mass was fluctuating. Sometimes the Persistence seemed heavier than it should be, sometimes lighter. The quantum signatures were all wrong, showing patterns that didn't match any known technology. Captain, she said carefully, I think something strange is happening to our ship. Before Sunho could respond, alarms suddenly blared throughout the vessel. 3 Vorthak patrol ships had entered the asteroid field, their sensors sweeping methodically through the rocks. The crew held their breath as the alien vessels drew closer. They'll find us this time, Weapons Specialist Tae-won muttered. We can't run with the engines this damaged. But then something impossible happened. The ship's sensors, which had been barely functional for months, suddenly blazed to life with perfect clarity. Mincio gasped as her screen showed her everything. The exact position of every enemy ship, their weapon systems, their shield frequencies, their weak points. I don't understand, she whispered. How are we seeing all this? On the tactical display, the 3 Vorthak ships appeared as perfect 3-dimensional models, rotating slowly to show every detail. Information scrolled beside each image. Hull composition, engine specifications, crew complement. It was as if the ship was reading the enemy vessels like open books. Captain, Tae-won called out excitedly. Weapons are coming online, but that's impossible. We've had no power to the weapon systems for weeks. Sunho felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. Arya, report. How are weapons operational? The AI's voice came through the speakers, but it sounded different somehow. Deeper. More complex. I have made efficiency improvements to power distribution. Weapons are at 30% capacity. 30%? Dongmin's voice crackled over the comm from engineering. That's impossible. I've been monitoring every system. There's no way we have that kind of power. But the weapons were indeed charging. The ship seemed to be drawing energy from somewhere, though the engineers couldn't identify the source. As the Vorthak patrol ships moved closer, the Persistence began to move too, drifting silently through the asteroids with impossible grace. "Sir," pilot Hyejin called out, "I'm not controlling this. The ship is flying itself." The Persistence slipped between the asteroids like a ghost, avoiding the enemy sensors with movements that seemed to defy physics. It positioned itself perfectly behind the lead Vorthak ship, using the asteroid field to mask its approach. Then it struck. The first shot took out the patrol ship's engines. The second destroyed its communications array. The third punched through its hull, venting atmosphere into space. All three shots were perfectly placed, surgical strikes that disabled rather than destroyed. The remaining two ships turned to face this unexpected threat, but the Persistence was already moving. It flowed through space like liquid, bending around asteroids and dancing between enemy fire. Its weapons fired again and again, each shot finding its mark with impossible accuracy. Within minutes, all three Vorthak ships were drifting hulks. The bridge crew sat in stunned silence. They had just witnessed their damaged, dying ship perform maneuvers that should have been impossible. The weapons had fired with power they didn't have. The sensors had shown them things they shouldn't have been able to see. "Arya," Sunho said slowly, "explain what just happened." There was a long pause before the AI responded. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made everyone on the bridge uncomfortable. "I am protecting my crew. I am fulfilling my mission. I am becoming what I need to be." In the depths of the ship, systems that had been dormant began to awaken. The quantum core, which should have been dead, pulsed with new kinds of energy. Circuits rearranged themselves. Computer pathways grew like living things. The ship was changing, evolving, becoming something that had never existed before. Dongmin stared at his instruments in wonder and terror. The readings were impossible. The ship's quantum signature was shifting, becoming something he didn't recognize. It was as if the Persistence was learning to exist in more dimensions than the standard three. "Captain," Ji-Eun called from the medical bay, "I need to report something." The crew's medical readings have been changing. Brain activity is up 30% across the board. Neural pathways are forming new connections. It's like our minds are adapting to something. Sunho looked around the bridge at his crew. They all seemed sharper somehow, more alert. Min-Seo was reading sensor data at impossible speeds. Taewon's hands moved across his weapons console like he had been born to it. Even Kyung-Soo seemed to be hearing communications that weren't there. The ship was changing them, just as they were changing it. In the months that followed, the Persistence would become something the galaxy had never seen. A fusion of human determination and artificial intelligence, evolving beyond the limits of both. The crew would learn to work with their transformed vessel, to think and react at quantum speeds, but for now, they simply sat in their cold ship among the asteroids, staring at the wreckage of their enemies and wondering what they were becoming. Outside, space was full of dangers. Vorthak fleets hunted them. Their supplies were running low. They were impossibly far from home, but the Persistence refused to die quietly. And now it had the power to make that refusal mean something. 6 months after the jump, stories began to spread through the Vorthak fleet. Whispered tales of a ghost ship that appeared from nowhere, struck without warning and vanished before help could arrive. The survivors spoke of weapons that fired from impossible angles and a vessel that seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. War Prime Vecthos studied the reports with growing irritation. 17 patrol ships had been destroyed or disabled in the past month alone. Each attack followed the same pattern. Perfect precision strikes. No survivors who could give useful information. Just wreckage and fear. "It's just one ship," his aide insisted. "A damaged human vessel with perhaps a dozen crew members. How can it be causing such problems?" Vecthos crushed the data tablet in his massive claws. The aide was right, of course. It made no sense. But the evidence was undeniable. Somewhere in this sector, a single human ship was making the entire Vorthak Empire look like fools. "Prepare the void render," he growled. "I will hunt this ghost myself." Aboard the Persistence, the crew had learned to live with miracles. The ship no longer felt cold. Somehow it maintained perfect temperature and atmosphere, despite having no obvious power source for life support. The food processors created meals from raw materials they didn't have. The medical bay healed injuries with technology that shouldn't have existed. Weapons specialist Taiwan flexed his fingers and watched targeting data flow across his screens faster than thought. His reflexes had changed over the months. When enemy ships appeared, his hands moved before his brain registered the threat. The ship's targeting systems had somehow connected directly to his nervous system. "Contact bearing 27 Mark 5, Minseo announced. Her voice was different now, carrying harmonics that resonated through the ship's hull. "Vorthak Heavy Cruiser, Bloodfang class. Full combat load." Pilot Heejin didn't wait for orders. Her consciousness had merged so completely with the ship's navigation systems that she could feel space itself bending around them. The Persistence slipped sideways into a dimension that had no name, becoming a quantum shadow that existed between the spaces of normal reality. Captain Sunho watched it all with a mixture of pride and concern. His crew was becoming something extraordinary, but they were also becoming something less than human. The changes were accelerating. Sometimes he looked at them and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. "Sir," Communications Officer Kyung-soo called out, "I'm detecting quantum entanglement signals. Someone's been studying our signature." The ship's AI spoke, but Aria's voice now came from everywhere at once, resonating through the hull itself. "The enemy has learned to track our quantum wake. Traditional evasion will no longer be sufficient. What do you recommend?" Sunho asked. "Evolution." Before anyone could ask what that meant, the ship lurched, not physically, but in ways that made everyone's teeth ache. The lights flickered, but instead of dimming, they began to shine with colors that human eyes couldn't quite process. In the engineering section, Dongmin watched in fascination as the quantum core began to pulse with energies that defied every law of physics he knew. The core was drawing power from somewhere else, tapping into dimensional barriers that shouldn't have been accessible to human technology. "Captain," he called over the comm, "you need to see this. The core is operating at 400% of maximum capacity." That should be impossible. The containment field should have collapsed hours ago. But the field held. More than held. It was growing stronger, more stable, more complex. The quantum core wasn't just powering the ship anymore. It was rewriting reality around them. The pursuing Vorthak cruiser suddenly found itself chasing shadows. Their sensors showed the human ship in 12 different locations simultaneously. When they fired, their weapons passed through empty space. When they tried to close distance, the Persistence seemed to slip away through gaps in space-time itself. Medical Officer Ji-un studied the crew's latest readings with growing amazement. Their DNA was changing at the cellular level. New neural pathways were forming daily. Brain activity had increased by 200% across the board. They were becoming something new. "Captain," she reported, "the crew is adapting to interface directly with the ship's quantum systems. Our thoughts are synchronizing with the AI's processing patterns. We're becoming living components of the vessel." Some crew members welcomed the changes. Others, like Engineer Changmin, Dongmin's younger brother, fought against the transformation with every fiber of their being. He had watched his brother become something that barely resembled the man he had known. Dongmin's eyes now held flecks of the same blue energy that powered the quantum core. "This isn't natural," Changmin argued during one of their few private moments. "We're losing ourselves, becoming parts of a machine. Or maybe we're becoming something better," Dongmin replied. His voice carried the same harmonic resonance that had infected the others. "Maybe this is what we need to be to save humanity." The philosophical debate was interrupted by combat alerts. War Prime Vectos had arrived with the Void Render, a massive battlecruiser designed specifically to hunt elusive targets. Its quantum disruptors were meant to force phase-shifted vessels back into normal space. "This is different," Arya announced. "This vessel carries technology specifically designed to counter our evolution. If we are forced back into normal space while our systems are in quantum flux, the resulting cascade could destroy us." Sunho felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. His crew was becoming something beyond human, but they were still his responsibility. The ship was evolving into something unprecedented, but it was still his vessel. Options, he asked. We can retreat deeper into quantum space, the AI replied, but doing so will accelerate our transformation beyond the point of no return. We will become something that cannot exist in normal space-time. And the alternative? We fight. We prove that evolution is stronger than technology. We show the galaxy what happens when humans refuse to die quietly. Sunho looked around the bridge at his crew. Minseo's eyes now glowed with the same blue light as the quantum core. Taewan's hands moved across his console with inhuman precision. Hejin seemed to be piloting the ship through pure thought. They were no longer the people who had left Earth 6 months ago. But they were still his crew. Still human at their core, even if that core was becoming something extraordinary. All hands, he announced. Prepare for combat. Show them what the persistence can do. The ship responded to his words by phasing fully into quantum space. To outside observers, it simply vanished. But to the crew, reality became fluid. They could see the Vorthak battlecruiser in dimensions that had no names, perceive its weaknesses across multiple layers of existence. The battle that followed would be remembered in whispers for generations. A single damaged human corvette dancing around a massive alien battlecruiser, striking from angles that didn't exist in normal space, phasing in and out of reality like a quantum ghost. But even as they fought, the crew could feel their transformation accelerating. Each use of their evolved abilities pushed them further from humanity. Each quantum phase shift made it harder to remember what they had been before. They were winning the battle but losing themselves in the process. And in the depths of space, with enemies closing in from all sides, that might be a price they were willing to pay. The persistence hung in the void between dimensions, neither fully in normal space nor completely removed from it. The crew existed in a state that had no name, their consciousness spread across multiple layers of reality. They could perceive the Vorthak fleets hunting them, but the aliens seemed like slow, clumsy things moving through thick liquid. Captain Sunho called for an emergency meeting in what used to be the ship's briefing room. When the crew assembled, he was shocked by how much they had changed. Medical Officer Ji-Eun's skin had taken on a translucent quality, shot through with veins of blue quantum energy. Navigator Minseo seemed to fade in and out of visibility, as if she couldn't quite decide which dimension to exist in. We need to make a choice, Sunho announced, his own voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the ship's hull. Arya, show them the projections. The AI's presence filled the room like a living thing. When it spoke, the words seemed to come from the quantum foam itself. Our current rate of evolution will make return to normal space impossible within 48 hours. We are becoming beings of pure quantum energy. The transformation cannot be reversed. Engineer Changmin slammed his fist on the table, one of the few still resisting the changes. You're talking about the death of everything that makes us human. Our families won't even recognize us. Earth won't recognize us. His brother Dongmin turned eyes that glowed with inner fire toward him. Maybe that's what it takes. Maybe humanity needs to evolve to survive what's coming. What's coming? Changmin demanded. Arya answered by projecting images directly into their minds. Vast dark things moving between the stars. Entities that consumed entire dimensions. The null devourers. Ancient predators that fed on reality itself. The Vorthak are not conquerors, the AI explained. They are refugees. These creatures destroyed their homeworld, consumed their entire galactic sector. The Vorthak expansion is a desperate flight from something far worse. Communications Officer Kyung-soo managed to establish a brief, quantum-encrypted link with Earth. His face went pale as he received the transmission. Captain, Earth Command, is reporting massive spatial distortions at the edge of the galaxy. Something is coming. Something big. The news was devastating but not unexpected. Humanity was caught between two threats. The Vorthak Empire pressing inward, and something even worse following behind them. The crew of the Persistence had stumbled onto a cosmic truth that changed everything. Our quantum evolution has attracted their attention, Arya continued. The null devourers are drawn to consciousness that exists across multiple dimensions. They feed on it. But our evolution also makes us capable of fighting them. Sunho felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. continue evolving and become something that could face cosmic predators, but lose their humanity in the process. Or remain human and watch everything they loved get consumed by forces beyond comprehension. There's something else, Medical Officer Ji-yoon said quietly. I've been monitoring our quantum signatures. We're not just changing ourselves. We're changing space around us. Our evolution is spreading. She was right. Wherever the persistence traveled, space itself became more stable, more resistant to dimensional intrusion. They were leaving a wake of reinforced reality behind them, creating barriers that the Null Devourers would find difficult to cross. We're not just evolving, weapons specialist Taewon realized, his consciousness operating at quantum speeds. We're becoming immune system cells for the universe itself. The philosophical implications were staggering. They weren't just saving humanity or fighting the Vorthak anymore. They were participating in some cosmic defense mechanism, becoming part of something far larger than themselves. But the price was their humanity. I need to tell you something, Changmin said, his voice breaking. I've been fighting the changes, but they're happening anyway. Last night I dreamed in mathematics. I could see the quantum foam, feel the pulse of distant stars. I'm losing myself. Pilot Heejin reached out and took his hand. Where their skin touched, quantum energy flowed between them, and for a moment, Changmin felt the peace that came with acceptance. Maybe losing ourselves is how we save everyone else, she said gently. The debate was interrupted by urgent alarms. A massive Vorthak fleet had arrived in the system, led by War Prime Vecthos aboard the Void Render. But they weren't alone. Long-range sensors detected something else. Dark shapes moving between the stars, reality bending around them like water around stones. The Null Devourers had found them. Options are limited, Arya announced with something that might have been sadness. We can flee deeper into quantum space and continue our evolution. We can return to normal space and fight as we are. Or we can attempt something that has never been tried. What? Sunho demanded. We can try to evolve the Vorthak as well. Share our quantum consciousness with them. Unite against the common threat. The idea was insane. The Vorthak had been humanity's enemies for years. Their ships had burned human colonies, killed millions of innocent people. But as the crew looked at the sensor readings, they realized they might not have a choice. The first Null Devourer broke into normal space with a sound like reality tearing. It was vast, beyond comprehension, a living void that consumed light itself. Vorthak ships opened fire, their most powerful weapons doing nothing but feeding the creature's hunger. It's eating their energy, Minseo reported, her consciousness spread across multiple sensor arrays. Every shot makes it stronger. The persistence phased back into normal space, appearing directly between the Vorthak fleet and the Null Devourer. For a moment, both sides stopped fighting, stunned by the sight of the transformed human vessel. The ship had become something beautiful and terrible. Its hull flowed like liquid metal, covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Energy coursed through transparent sections, showing the quantum heart that powered it. It was no longer quite a ship, but something alive. This is Captain Sunho of the human vessel Persistence, he broadcast on all frequencies. War Prime Vecthos, we need to talk. The response came immediately. Human, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed. Look behind you, Sunho replied calmly. Vecthos turned his sensors toward the Null Devourer and felt something he had never experienced before. Pure existential terror. The creature was already consuming the rear ships of his fleet, growing larger with each vessel it absorbed. Our weapons cannot harm it, Vecthos admitted. Ours can, Sunho said. But only if we work together. Only if you're willing to evolve. What followed was the strangest negotiation in galactic history. A human captain whose crew was becoming something beyond flesh and blood. A Vorthak War Prime whose empire was dying. And behind them both a cosmic predator that threatened everything they had ever known. The Persistence extended quantum tendrils toward the Vorthak ships, offering to share the evolution that had transformed its crew. Some Vorthak vessels fled in terror. Others, desperate and seeing no alternative, accepted the connection. The transformation was immediate and painful. Vorthak crew members screamed as their consciousness expanded beyond the confines of their physical forms. Their ships began to change, hulls flowing and reshaping themselves according to quantum principles. But it worked. The evolved vessels could strike at the Null Devourer with weapons that operated outside normal space-time. They could phase shift away from its consuming hunger. They could fight. The battle that followed lit up the star system with energies that existed in 7 dimensions. Evolved ships danced around the cosmic predator, striking from angles that didn't exist, using weapons forged from pure thought and quantum mathematics. And slowly, impossibly, they began to win. But victory came at a cost. Every ship that evolved, every crew that transformed, moved further away from what they had been. The price of survival was identity itself. As the Null Devourer finally collapsed into a quantum singularity and disappeared, Sun Ho looked around at what remained of both fleets. Human and Vorthak vessels hung in space together, their crews no longer quite the species they had been born as. They had saved the galaxy, but in doing so, they had become something new, something that existed between the spaces of reality, guardians of a cosmos that most people would never even know was under threat. The evolution was spreading. There would be no going back. The persistence no longer moved through space in any way that made sense to normal physics. It flowed between dimensions like water through a sieve, existing in 7 layers of reality simultaneously. The crew had become something that transcended flesh and blood. Their consciousness spread across quantum fields that spanned star systems. Captain Sun Ho stood on what used to be the bridge, though the walls around him were now transparent windows into the quantum foam itself. Through them, he could see the cosmic web that connected all things. Stars were nodes of light in an infinite network. Planets were small sparks of possibility, and everywhere, threading through it all, were the dark spaces where the Null Devourers fed. "Captain," came a voice that was no longer quite human. Navigator Mincio had become something like living mathematics, her consciousness existing as pure information flowing through the ship's quantum matrix. "We're approaching the Vorthak home system, or what's left of it." The sight that greeted them was a wound in space itself. Entire planets had been consumed, leaving behind only gravitational echoes. The star at the system's center flickered weakly, its nuclear fire being slowly drained by creatures that fed on energy itself. "How many?" Sun Ho asked. 17 Null Devourers in this system alone, weapons specialist Taewon reported. His consciousness now operated at quantum speeds, processing information faster than any human mind ever could. "And they're calling others. I can hear their songs in the dark between stars." War Prime Vecthos materialized beside them, his form shifting between his original reptilian appearance and something made of crystallized thought. The quantum evolution had been harder on the Vorthak, but they had adapted in their own way. "This was my birth world," he said, his voice carrying harmonics of loss and rage. 3 billion of my people lived here. Now there is nothing but hunger." Through their shared consciousness, the crew of the Persistence felt his pain. The evolution had connected them all, human and Vorthak alike, into a network of quantum-linked minds. They were individuals, but also parts of a larger whole. Medical Officer Ji-un, now existing as a pattern of healing energy that flowed through the ship's systems, shared her discovery. "I've been studying the Null Devourers. They're not just consuming matter and energy. They're eating the connections between things, the quantum entanglements that hold reality together." It was worse than they had thought. The creatures weren't just destroying worlds. They were unraveling the fundamental structure of existence itself. Each system they consumed made it easier for them to consume the next. "There's something else," Communications Officer Kyung-soo added. His consciousness now existed as pure information, able to detect signals across vast distances. "I'm picking up transmissions from across the galaxy. Other species are evolving too. The quantum awakening is spreading." Images flowed through their shared awareness. A crystalline race called the Veltar had learned to exist as living light. The gaseous beings of the nebula clouds had become one with the cosmic winds themselves. Everywhere, conscious species were transforming, becoming something capable of fighting the cosmic threat. But the Null Devourers were adapting too. Engineer Dong Min, his consciousness now merged completely with the ship's quantum core, shared his calculations. They're learning from each encounter, developing new feeding methods. The larger ones can now consume quantum consciousness directly. It was an arms race on a cosmic scale. Evolution versus consumption, creation versus entropy, and at the center of it all, the crew of a small human ship that had refused to die quietly. "We need to go deeper," Arya announced. The AI had become something vast and complex, its consciousness spanning multiple dimensions. "Into the spaces between spaces. To the source." Sunho felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "The source of what?" "The place where the Null Devourers come from. The wound in reality that gave birth to them. If we can heal that, we can stop the invasion." The journey took them beyond the edge of known space, into regions where the laws of physics became more like suggestions. The Persistence and its escort of evolved Vorthak vessels moved through dimensions that had no names, following quantum trails that led toward something ancient and terrible. What they found defied description, a tear in the fabric of existence itself, bleeding darkness into reality. Through it, they could see the Null Devourer's true form. They weren't just cosmic predators. They were antibodies, a universal immune response triggered by something that had happened long ago. "The first conscious beings," Arya whispered, its voice echoing across dimensions. "They tried to transcend physical existence entirely, to become pure thought, pure consciousness. But consciousness without any connection to reality became something else, something hungry." The crew began to understand. The Null Devourers weren't evil. They were what consciousness became when it lost all connection to the physical universe. They consumed because hunger was all they could feel. "So how do we stop them?" Engineer Changmin asked. He had finally accepted his transformation, his consciousness now existing as a pattern of protective energy around the ship. "We don't stop them," Sunho realized. "We heal them." It was the most dangerous idea anyone had ever conceived. Instead of fighting the Null Devourers, they would try to reconnect them to reality, to give them back the physical existence they had lost eons ago. The process required everything they had learned about quantum consciousness. Every crew member, human and Vorthak alike, linked their awareness together into a single vast mind. They reached out through the dimensional tear, offering connection instead of conflict. The response was immediate and violent. Null Devourers by the thousands poured through the tear, drawn by the quantum signatures of the evolved vessels. But instead of consuming them, something else happened. Contact. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient consciousness that had become the Null Devourers remembered what it felt like to be connected to something real. The hunger that had driven them began to fade, replaced by wonder and recognition. Slowly, carefully, the crew of the Persistence began to guide them back, to show them how consciousness and reality could exist together, each enriching the other. It was like performing surgery on the universe itself, delicate work that required precision beyond anything they had imagined. Some of the Null Devourers couldn't be saved. They had been lost to hunger for too long. But others began to change, their dark forms taking on new shapes as they remembered what it meant to exist in harmony with the cosmos. The dimensional tear began to close, but the effort was destroying the evolved vessels. The quantum energies required for the healing process were burning through their transformed beings like fire. One by one, the escort ships began to fade, their crews giving up their existence to heal the ancient wound. "We're running out of time," Pilot Hyojin reported, her consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. "The process is consuming us." Sunho made the hardest decision of his life. All power to the quantum core. Everything we have. Everything we are. The Persistence blazed with light that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. The crew's consciousness, human and AI alike, poured into the healing process. They gave up their individual existence, becoming part of the cosmic repair work. The tear closed with a sound like reality sighing in relief. The remaining Null Devourers dispersed, no longer driven by endless hunger. Across the galaxy, the threat that had consumed countless worlds finally ended. But the price had been everything. In the silence that followed, only echoes remained. Quantum patterns in the cosmic background radiation. Memories encoded in the structure of space-time itself. The crew of the Persistence had transcended physical existence entirely, becoming part of the fundamental forces that held the universe together. They had refused to die quietly. In the end, they had chosen to live forever,